"You have no idea who you are talking to." Those words would later become the lesson everyone remembered. But at that moment, Officer Michael Hayes believed he understood exactly who was standing in front of him. The busy airport terminal was filled with the sounds of travelers beginning their journeys, rolling suitcases moving across the floor, and announcements echoing through the gates. Among the crowd was a quiet man carrying a small travel bag, dressed simply, and waiting for his flight like everyone else. His name was Daniel Carter. To the people passing by, he looked like an ordinary passenger. There was nothing about his appearance that revealed the years of dedication, training, and service hidden behind his calm expression. He was not wearing a military uniform. He was not displaying any awards or signs of recognition. He was simply a man trying to reach his destination. But Officer Michael Hayes saw something different. Standing near the airport security area, the officer believed he had identified a problem. He looked at Daniel and made a quick judgment based on what he could see in that moment. He did not know about Daniel's years serving as a Navy SEAL. He did not know about the discipline that shaped his decisions. He did not know about the responsibilities Daniel carried long before he ever entered that airport. All he saw was a traveler, and that was where the misunderstanding began. Daniel noticed the officer's approach, but he did not react with frustration. He did not raise his voice. He did not attempt to prove himself. Instead, he remained calm and respectful. That response came from years of experience. Daniel had learned that a person's true character was revealed most clearly during difficult moments. Anyone could remain composed when everything was comfortable. The real test came when someone felt misunderstood. Imagine standing in a crowded airport where people are forming opinions about you without knowing your story. Imagine having the ability to change everything by simply explaining who you are, yet choosing patience because your values matter more than recognition. That was Daniel Carter. He understood that respect should not come only after people discover someone's achievements. Respect should exist before the title, before the uniform, and before the reputation. During his years as a Navy SEAL, Daniel learned that leadership was not about making sure everyone knew your accomplishments. It was about carrying responsibility even when nobody was watching. Those lessons stayed with him everywhere he went. Officer Hayes, however, viewed the situation differently. He believed his position gave him control over the moment. His badge represented authority, and he trusted that authority more than understanding the person standing before him. The contrast between the two men could not have been clearer. One man carried visible authority through his position. The other carried invisible strength built through years of service. Neither of them knew that the quiet passenger in front of the officer was not an ordinary traveler. Neither of them knew that Daniel Carter's story reached far beyond the walls of that airport terminal. And as the questions continued, the truth about the man behind the silence was waiting to be discovered. The airport terminal continued moving around Daniel Carter as if nothing unusual was happening. Travelers checked their departure times, families gathered near boarding areas, and the familiar rhythm of a busy morning continued throughout the building. But near the security area, a quiet moment was revealing something much deeper than a simple conversation between an officer and a passenger. Officer Michael Hayes still believed he understood the situation. From his perspective, he was simply doing his job and asking questions. But Daniel saw the moment differently. He understood that the way people respond when they are misunderstood often reveals who they truly are. Daniel remained calm. He answered clearly. He showed the same patience that had guided him throughout years of military service. He did not allow the assumptions of someone else to change the way he carried himself. That discipline was not something he learned overnight. It was built over years of commitment, responsibility, and preparation. Long before he became the quiet traveler standing in an airport terminal, Daniel Carter made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He chose a path of service. He wanted to become part of something larger than himself. Through dedication and years of demanding preparation, he earned the respect that came with becoming a Navy SEAL. But Daniel never believed the title itself was what made someone valuable. To him, the title represented a responsibility, not a reason to feel superior. The most important lessons he learned were not about recognition. They were about discipline, teamwork, and understanding the importance of staying focused when circumstances became difficult. Those lessons followed him everywhere, even when he was no longer wearing a uniform. Standing in that airport, Daniel carried no visible signs of his military background. He looked like anyone else traveling that day. And that was exactly why the moment mattered. It revealed how quickly people could form opinions when they only saw a small part of someone's story. Officer Hayes saw a passenger. He did not see the years of sacrifice behind Daniel's calm expression. He did not see the experiences that shaped the way Daniel handled pressure. He did not see the character built through countless moments where patience and responsibility mattered more than recognition. Imagine having a lifetime of achievements that nobody around you knows about. Imagine knowing you could immediately change the way people view you by explaining your background, but choosing not to because you believe respect should exist before anyone knows your accomplishments. That was Daniel's mindset. He did not want to be treated differently because of his service. He wanted to be treated fairly because he was a person. The difference between Daniel and Officer Hayes became more noticeable with every passing moment. Hayes focused on the authority represented by his position. Daniel focused on the values that guided his actions. One man carried a badge that people could see. The other carried a history that remained invisible. Around them, a few travelers began noticing the contrast. They noticed Daniel's calm approach. They noticed that he was not trying to create an argument or attract attention. They noticed that something about the situation did not match the simple explanation they first assumed. And while everyone in the terminal continued watching, nobody realized that the quiet passenger standing before Officer Hayes was carrying a story that would soon change everything they thought they knew. The busy airport terminal continued to move around Daniel Carter, but the moment near the security area had become something far more meaningful than anyone expected. To most travelers, it still looked like a simple interaction between an officer and a passenger. But beneath the surface, it revealed a difference between two completely different views of authority. Officer Michael Hayes believed he understood the situation because he could see only what was in front of him. Daniel Carter understood that every person carried a story that could not be discovered in a few seconds. Daniel remained composed because he had spent years learning the importance of patience and self-control. His calm response was not accidental. It was the result of a lifetime of experiences that shaped the way he handled difficult moments. Before becoming the quiet traveler in the airport, Daniel had already lived a journey that most people would never know. His path began with a desire to serve his country and contribute to something greater than himself. He understood that service was not about recognition. It was about responsibility. Through years of commitment, preparation, and dedication, Daniel earned his place as a Navy SEAL. But even after reaching that level, he never viewed his title as a reason to demand respect. He viewed it as a reminder of the responsibility he carried. The lessons Daniel learned throughout his career stayed with him long after he stepped away from daily military routines. He learned that true professionals did not need to constantly explain their achievements. They allowed their actions to reveal their character. That belief shaped the way he responded in the airport. He had every opportunity to immediately explain who he was. He could have changed the entire conversation with a few words. But Daniel understood that revealing his identity just to receive better treatment would miss the larger lesson. Respect should not begin only after someone discovers a person's accomplishments. It should exist from the beginning. Imagine standing in a public place where people have already created a picture of you before they know your name. Imagine carrying years of dedication and service while remaining silent because you believe your behavior matters more than your reputation. That was Daniel Carter. He was not trying to win a disagreement. He was not trying to embarrass anyone. He was simply trying to move through the world with the same values that guided him throughout his life. Meanwhile, Officer Hayes continued viewing the situation through the limited information he had. He focused on the authority of his position, but he had not yet recognized the deeper meaning behind Daniel's quiet confidence. A badge could show a person's role, but it could not reveal their wisdom. A position could provide responsibility, but character determined how that responsibility was carried. As the conversation continued, small details began attracting attention from people nearby. They noticed Daniel's professionalism. They noticed that he remained respectful despite the circumstances. They noticed that he carried himself differently from what they expected. Something about him suggested a story far greater than what they could see. The truth was still hidden, but it was getting closer to being revealed. Because Daniel Carter was not just a passenger waiting for a flight. He was a man whose journey, service, and identity had remained invisible until the exact moment when the world needed to see it. The airport terminal remained filled with movement, but the atmosphere around Daniel Carter and Officer Michael Hayes continued changing with every passing moment. What began as a routine interaction was slowly becoming a lesson about assumptions, responsibility, and the importance of seeing beyond what appears on the surface. Officer Hayes still believed he had the situation under control. He looked at Daniel and saw only a passenger standing in front of him. He did not see the years of commitment behind the calm expression. He did not see the discipline created through countless hours of training. He did not see the experiences that shaped Daniel into the person he had become. Daniel, however, understood something that Officer Hayes had not yet considered. A person's value was not determined by how much others knew about them. It was determined by the principles they carried when nobody was watching. That belief had guided Daniel throughout his entire journey. Years earlier, before he ever stepped into that airport, Daniel made a decision that would define his life. He chose a path built around service. He understood that wearing a uniform was not about receiving special treatment. It was about accepting responsibility. Becoming a Navy SEAL required dedication, focus, and the ability to remain steady during challenging situations. But the most important lessons Daniel learned were not about physical ability or recognition. They were about character. He learned that leadership meant staying calm when others expected a reaction. It meant choosing professionalism even when emotions could take control. It meant understanding that every person deserved respect. Those lessons followed Daniel everywhere, including moments when nobody knew his background. In the airport, Daniel was not trying to hide his identity. He simply did not believe his achievements should be necessary for people to treat him fairly. That was the difference between him and many others. Some people believed respect came after discovering someone's title. Daniel believed respect should come before that. Imagine carrying a lifetime of service while standing among strangers who only see a few seconds of your story. Imagine having the ability to change the entire situation instantly, but choosing patience because you understand that character matters more than proving a point. That was the choice Daniel made. Around them, a few travelers began noticing the contrast between the two men. Officer Hayes represented visible authority. His position was clear. His role was easy to identify. Daniel represented something different. His strength was not displayed through a title or a symbol. It appeared through his actions, his patience, and the way he handled pressure. The difference became impossible to ignore. One man focused on what he could see. The other understood what could not be seen. Officer Hayes did not realize that the person he was questioning had spent years earning the trust and respect of people far beyond the airport terminal. He did not know that Daniel's story was connected to a level of service most travelers would never imagine. Meanwhile, Daniel continued waiting calmly, unaware that small details about his identity were beginning to attract attention. A routine review of information connected to his travel began revealing something unexpected. The quiet passenger who seemed ordinary was connected to a story much bigger than anyone in the terminal understood. And soon, the truth behind Daniel Carter's silence would begin to change the way everyone viewed the entire situation. The information connected to Daniel Carter's travel details began creating a picture that nobody inside the airport expected. What had looked like an ordinary interaction was slowly revealing a much deeper story. The same man who had been standing quietly near the security area was now becoming the center of attention for a completely different reason. Daniel remained calm as always. He did not change his behavior when people started looking at him differently. He did not suddenly become more confident because others began recognizing his background. His strength had never come from the attention of others. It came from the values he carried every day. A member of the airport staff reviewing the information connected to Daniel noticed details that stood out. There were records that showed a history of military service, dedication, and responsibility. The name connected to the information was not unfamiliar. Daniel Carter was not simply a traveler passing through the airport. He was a Navy SEAL whose career represented years of commitment and sacrifice. Yet even as the truth began to appear, Daniel continued showing the same patience he had shown from the beginning. He understood that the discovery of his identity changed how people viewed him, but it did not change who he was. Throughout his life, Daniel had learned that recognition was temporary, but character lasted forever. He had never served because he wanted people to admire him. He served because he believed in responsibility and protecting something greater than himself. That mindset shaped the way he handled every situation. Officer Michael Hayes began noticing the difference between what he first assumed and what was actually true. The person he believed needed to explain himself was someone who had spent years proving himself through actions. The situation forced him to consider something many people forget. A person's story does not begin when others discover it. A person's story exists long before anyone else becomes aware of it. Imagine carrying years of experience, dedication, and achievement while being judged by a single moment. Imagine having the ability to reveal everything about yourself but choosing patience because you believe respect should not depend on your accomplishments. That was Daniel's approach. He did not want people to change their attitude because they discovered he was a Navy SEAL. He wanted people to understand that every individual deserves fairness before their background becomes known. Around the terminal, the atmosphere continued to shift. People who had watched the interaction began recognizing the difference between confidence and arrogance. Daniel's confidence came from knowing who he was. Officer Hayes's authority came from his position. The contrast between them became clearer with every passing moment. A badge could identify someone's job, but it could not define their wisdom. A title could describe someone's role, but it could not replace compassion. The information about Daniel continued moving through proper channels, and more details about his service became clear. The quiet passenger who had walked through the airport without drawing attention was now being recognized for something far beyond what anyone could see. But the biggest surprise was still ahead. Daniel's connection to service was not just a personal achievement. It was something recognized by people far beyond the airport. And as the truth continued spreading, Officer Hayes was about to discover that the person he underestimated was someone whose name carried respect in places he never expected. The situation inside the airport continued changing as more information about Daniel Carter became clear. What started as a simple exchange between a passenger and an officer had now become a moment that revealed how quickly assumptions could be challenged by the truth. Daniel remained standing quietly, carrying himself with the same patience and professionalism he had shown from the beginning. The attention around him had changed, but Daniel had not. He was still the same person who entered the terminal with a small travel bag and no expectation that anyone would recognize his achievements. That was one of the things that separated Daniel from many people. He understood that respect was not something a person should receive only after others discovered their accomplishments. Respect was something every person deserved from the beginning. The details connected to Daniel's service continued moving through official channels. The information confirmed what many people were beginning to understand. Daniel Carter was a highly respected Navy SEAL whose years of dedication represented much more than a title. His service reflected discipline, commitment, and a responsibility that extended beyond himself. But Daniel never believed his background made him more important than anyone else. To him, it created a responsibility to treat others with the same respect he hoped to receive. Officer Michael Hayes watched as the situation developed in a way he never expected. The confidence he had at the beginning of the interaction started to fade as he recognized the difference between appearance and reality. He had focused on what he could see in front of him, but he had not considered the story behind the person standing there. Daniel's calm behavior became even more meaningful. He was not calm because the situation was easy. He was calm because he had trained himself to remain focused when circumstances became uncertain. That ability was built through years of preparation and experience. Imagine having a lifetime of service behind you while standing in front of someone who only knows a few moments of your story. Imagine having every reason to explain yourself, yet choosing patience because you understand that character is more powerful than recognition. Daniel lived by that principle. He knew that revealing his identity could immediately change the way people treated him, but he also knew that the lesson was bigger than the moment. The real issue was not whether people respected him after discovering he was a Navy SEAL. The real issue was whether people were willing to offer respect before knowing anything about him. Around the airport terminal, more people began noticing the difference between the two men. Officer Hayes represented visible authority through his position. Daniel represented a different kind of authority, one built through responsibility, discipline, and trust. One was easy to see. The other had to be discovered. The conversation that began near the security area had now reached a point where the truth could no longer remain hidden. Additional information connected to Daniel's service revealed that his story reached beyond his personal achievements. His name carried significance among people who understood the level of dedication required to serve in his role. The airport had already learned that Daniel Carter was not an ordinary traveler. But the next discovery would reveal why his service had earned attention from people far beyond that terminal. And when that connection became known, everyone would understand that the quiet man who never needed to announce his importance had been carrying a story much larger than anyone imagined. The atmosphere inside the airport had completely changed. What began as a moment where Daniel Carter was treated like an ordinary passenger had transformed into a situation where people were beginning to understand the depth behind his quiet presence. Yet Daniel remained exactly the same. He did not look for attention. He did not seek approval. He simply stood with the same calm expression that had been there from the beginning. For Daniel, recognition was never the goal. Responsibility was. The information that revealed his military background continued reaching the appropriate channels, and soon the significance of his service became clearer. Daniel Carter was not just someone who had worn a uniform. He was someone who had spent years representing the values of commitment, discipline, and service. His role as a Navy SEAL was not a symbol of superiority. It was a reminder of the responsibility he carried every day. The people around him began seeing the situation differently. The same man who had been questioned moments earlier was now being viewed through a completely different lens. But Daniel did not allow that change in perception to affect him. He understood something that many people forget. A person's worth does not increase when others finally recognize it. It was always there. Officer Michael Hayes stood in a difficult moment of reflection. At the beginning, he believed his position gave him a complete understanding of the situation. He believed the information available to him was enough. But now he was facing a reality that challenged those assumptions. The person he had judged quickly was someone whose background represented years of dedication and achievement. The lesson was becoming clear. Authority is not measured only by the position someone holds. It is measured by how that person chooses to use it. Daniel could have used his background to change the entire conversation instantly. He could have revealed his identity and demanded different treatment. But he chose not to. He believed that doing so would miss the larger point. The issue was never about whether a Navy SEAL deserved respect. The issue was whether every person deserved respect before their accomplishments were known. Imagine carrying a reputation respected by many people while standing unnoticed among strangers. Imagine having the power to end a misunderstanding immediately but choosing patience because you believe dignity speaks louder than status. That was the choice Daniel made. His silence was not weakness. It was discipline. His patience was not surrender. It was strength. As the details continued to emerge, the situation reached people far beyond the airport terminal. The information connected to Daniel's service showed that his name was recognized within important military circles. The quiet traveler who had walked through the airport without announcing himself was now connected to a much larger story. Meanwhile, Officer Hayes began to understand that the moment was no longer simply about a conversation between an officer and a passenger. It was about accountability, awareness, and the responsibility that comes with authority. The airport terminal that once seemed like an ordinary place had become the setting for a powerful reminder. People are often more than what others see at first glance. And Daniel Carter, the man who never needed to introduce his achievements, was about to show everyone that true respect comes from character long before it comes from recognition. The airport terminal had become a place of reflection rather than confrontation. The same location where Daniel Carter had first been seen as just another traveler was now filled with a completely different understanding of who he was. Yet despite the attention surrounding him, Daniel remained focused on one thing: carrying himself with the same respect and discipline he had shown from the beginning. He did not see the moment as a chance to prove that he was important. He saw it as a chance to remind people that every individual deserves to be treated with fairness. As more details about Daniel's service became known, the people around him began to understand the difference between appearance and reality. The quiet man standing near the security area was someone who had dedicated years of his life to serving others. His accomplishments were significant, but Daniel never measured his value by titles or recognition. He believed that the true measure of a person was found in their actions, especially during moments when they had every reason to react emotionally but chose patience instead. Officer Michael Hayes was now facing a moment of personal reflection. The situation forced him to look beyond the assumptions he had made earlier. He began realizing that authority without understanding could create mistakes, and that responsibility required more than simply following a position. It required fairness, awareness, and the willingness to see people as individuals. Daniel noticed the change in the atmosphere, but he did not seek an apology for the sake of pride. He was not interested in making another person feel embarrassed. His purpose was never revenge. His purpose was understanding. That was one of the qualities that separated him from the situation around him. Many people believe strength comes from having the ability to control a moment. Daniel understood that real strength often comes from having the ability to control yourself. Imagine standing in front of people who misunderstood you, knowing that you could reveal your entire background and immediately change their opinion. Now imagine choosing not to do that because you believe your character should speak before your achievements. That was the lesson Daniel carried. His identity as a Navy SEAL explained part of his journey, but it did not define all of him. He was more than a title. He was a person shaped by values, experiences, and choices. As the information continued reaching the proper channels, the significance of the situation became clearer. Military officials who became aware of the circumstances recognized that the issue was not only about one person. It represented something larger about respect, judgment, and the responsibility that comes with authority. Officer Hayes understood that the moment was no longer about who had more power. It was about recognizing the importance of using power correctly. Around the terminal, the story continued spreading quietly. Travelers who had witnessed the interaction saw something they would remember long after leaving the airport. They saw a person who could have responded with anger but chose dignity instead. They saw that true confidence did not need to announce itself. And they saw that sometimes the person who appears ordinary is carrying a story extraordinary enough to change everyone's perspective. The airport terminal slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the lesson created inside those walls would remain with everyone who witnessed it. Travelers continued moving toward their gates. Announcements continued filling the air, and another busy day continued around them. Yet for Daniel Carter and Officer Michael Hayes, the moment had become something much greater than a simple misunderstanding. It had become a reminder that every person carries a story that cannot be discovered by a quick glance. Daniel stood exactly as he had from the beginning. He did not celebrate the fact that people finally understood who he was. He did not seek attention after his background became known. The respect that came from his service was never something he demanded. It was something he earned through years of commitment, discipline, and quiet dedication. For Daniel, being a Navy SEAL was not about having a title that separated him from others. It was about accepting a responsibility to represent values bigger than himself. He believed that the strongest people were not those who needed everyone to recognize their achievements. They were the people who continued doing what was right even when nobody knew their name. Officer Michael Hayes left the moment with a different understanding of authority. At the beginning, he believed his position gave him the knowledge needed to judge the situation. But he learned that authority without empathy could create misunderstandings. A badge could identify a role, but it could not reveal the full story of the person standing in front of it. True responsibility required patience, fairness, and the willingness to look beyond first impressions. Daniel never wanted the moment to become about embarrassment or punishment. He wanted it to become a lesson. He understood that mistakes could become opportunities for people to learn and grow. That was why he chose dignity instead of anger. He chose understanding instead of conflict. He chose to show that strength was not measured by how much power someone could display, but by how much self-control someone could maintain. Imagine walking through life carrying achievements that most people will never know about. Imagine having every reason to prove yourself, but choosing humility because your character matters more than recognition. That was Daniel Carter's example. His story was not powerful because of a title. It was powerful because of the person behind that title. The events at the airport reminded everyone watching that appearances could be misleading. Someone who seems ordinary may have spent years achieving extraordinary things. Someone who says very little may carry experiences that shaped them in ways others cannot imagine. As Daniel prepared to continue his journey, he walked away without seeking applause. He did not need the airport to remember his rank. He did not need strangers to know his accomplishments. He already knew who he was, and that was the greatest lesson of all. True honor does not come from demanding recognition. It comes from living with integrity when recognition is nowhere in sight. Daniel Carter entered the airport as a person most people overlooked. He left as a reminder that respect should never depend on what someone looks like, what others assume, or what titles they carry. Because sometimes the person who appears to have the least power is the person who has already earned the greatest respect.